Alright, everybody. How's it going? It is time to talk about Shokugeki no Soma. If you haven't seen the introduction to this review, you're certainly welcome to go look as to how I'm going to break all this down, but it's all going to be pretty self explanatory as we go along. So let's jump right in. We are talking about the introduction, the training camp, and the Karage Wars mini arc. The structure will be pretty easy to tell once I start. Most of the videos are gonna follow this type of format, so just bear with me here. So starting off with the introduction arc, we have our first chapter that introduces Soma, introduces a few characters, introduces Joichiro a little bit, and just some randos, as well as one of his childhood friends that comes up a little bit later. And we have Soma, who is taken to Totsuki Academy, um, instructed to by his dad, saying that Yukihira, the restaurant, is going to close up, for a little bit. And he does. He goes to Totsuki Academy where he meets his friends at the Polar Star dorm and Erina Nakiri, the woman who has the God's tongue, who happens to be the same age as her. She rejects his cooking, even though, she seemingly likes it. She rejects him because of his attitude, and her grandfather, seeing what she did and seeing how biased she was, decides to overturn it. So he goes into the Polar Star dorm, as aforementioned, and begins to make his way up the ranks. He defeats Nikumi, or Mito Ikumi, in a battle, Shokugeki, for the Donberry, I believe it is what it's called. The Donars, that was the right name. The Donars, who were going to be shut down, and wins, of course, which kind of sets us in motion for the next part, which is the training camp arc, but we'll get there. So, first 13 chapters is what this covers, and it's really good. It really, really sets you up for everything this manga is about. Number one, it really gives us a good insight to Soma's character, of course. As the main character, you have to develop in a way that makes you root for the main character, but also gives the character some depth. And for certain, the introduction arc does that. So we have Soma, who is. He's a little quirky. He makes things sort of ad lib at sometimes. He will make weird combinations, and that sort of fuels his desire to make better dishes because a lot of his dishes are failures, but he can ultimately make something worthwhile, getting ideas from failures or breeding failures from successes, as we see a little bit later on in this arc where he has to go up with the smiling chef alongside of Megumi Tadakoro, and he has to, deal with the situation of the salt that was poured into his dish by one of the other Totsuki students. He does something with honey that makes it break down and make the braising a lot quicker. So essentially, that was a success that he had to do off the cuff, but that fueled the honey and squid that he made Tadakoro ingest. So it's really sort of symbiotic the way that some of his failures breed successes and vice versa. So that's a really good development of Soma's character. He is sort of the sexually oblivious type that is often in the Shonen Jump, especially. There are a lot of either sexually oblivious or extremely perverted. They're usually one or the other. Sometimes they can be a bit of both, which is interesting. But Soma definitely leans towards the oblivious side, even though his cooking is a very different story, considering the very first one of our scenes that we see is, of course, a tentacle wrapping around, I forget her name, but the girl, the childhood friend, that the tentacle literally digs right in between her legs. So yeah, I think his cooking does that for him. In another sense, we have a lot of heart out of his character. He loves Yukihira restaurant, which is, as we see in the first episode or chapter, where he defends it with his, basically, with his honor as a chef and maybe his life, because, he could have put himself into harm's way for this. He has that sort of badass personality, but at the same time, he gets very angry at certain injustices, like looking down on somebody just because they're a lower economic class. And that's something that's relatable, of course. It's relatable to a lot of people who don't like the rich or whatever, or think the rich are, flaunt their wealth, or anybody who is of that mindset. So the character of Soma has a lot of interesting little quirks and sort of, I guess, little facets that really make him a good character very early on. I mean, the first chapter really gets you. We're not including that one shot, by the way, but that one shot was great. Aside from that, though, the first chapter really makes you root for Soma, really love him, and just really, you're on his side from the beginning, which is a really good writing technique for any author that wants you to like the main character. Oftentimes in Shonen Jump, I find the main character to be unbearable to some extent, whether they're like a child and suddenly overpowered, or they get these hidden powers. Like, hidden powers are the worst. They're probably the worst offenders in Shonen Jump, are hidden powers where, a main character is losing and then suddenly something awakens within them that they have no control over, and then they suddenly win. That is 100% not in Soma's character, which is incredible, the fact that that's the thing. But I digress. So Soma is very, very good. He is a very likable character. He has a great character design, artistically. You have to root for him. You just gotta root for him. When it comes to the character of Erina Nakiri, she is purposely unlikable, and I think that is a genius, piece of writing from Yuto. At least early on, she's supposed to be unlikable. I mean, she legitimately wanted to block Soma from entering Totsuki Academy just because she did not like him. Had nothing to do with whether or not his dish was good. It had nothing to do with whether or not his dish was good. It had everything to do with how she felt about his attitude. Which, in all fairness, yes, Soma should not have taunted Erina. You don't taunt a judge. Like, that is stupid. Although that's part of his character, and that's a good flaw to have, I think, is, some cockiness that can get you in trouble. But Erina is purposely made unlikable. Of course, her character design artistically is incredible, but she is given this attitude, the exact attitude that Soma hates, of looking down on commoners and basically looking down on anybody that's not her or prestigious enough, and that continues throughout this arc for certain. You're of course free to like her for that, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with liking a character that is supposed to be unlikable. I think that's the case with Dio Brando and JoJo, but Dio is better done than Erina Nakiri for sure, and Dio's a villain, but that's besides the point. Moving on, the character of Megumi Tadakuro is likable from the start, of course. You feel so bad for her. She's got like E. She's a very innocent, girl that's just trying to get by, and Soma comes along and she has to work with this guy who just said that he's going to take the top spot in Totsuki, and now everybody's gunning for him, and now everybody's gunning for her. So again, Yuto really gets you on her side too right away, since she's working with Soma, and you feel bad that she's struggling. Again, it's a relatable thing. A lot of us struggle. Not everybody's good in school. Some people are better academically than others. Some people are better at street smarts. Some people are just better at practicality rather than theory. And that really shows for Megumi, because her cooking is actually quite good, but her academics not as much. And of course, the anime gives her a great voice too. But that's besides the point. We're not really talking about the anime so much. But the manga, her character is well developed very quickly upon meeting her. You get a little bit of her background. You get, a lot of personality, etc. And she really works well off of Soma in terms of comedy and also drama, which is a really, really good secondary type of character to have. A very strong supporting character will really shine with the main character off of drama and comedy, and we really see that later on when we get to the training camp arc. So then we have a little bit more minor characters, still important for sure. As I said, we get a little bit introduced to Joichiro, but he doesn't become more important until later. This is a little bit of a precursor to his character. He seems a little aloof and sort of like Souma, definitely a little badass to start. But then we have the Polar Star Dorm, which is kind of your main cast of this arc. You have Ibusaki Shun, you have Ryoko Sakaki, you have Yuki Yoshino, you have Zenji Marui, and Ishiki Satoshi. And of course you have Daigo and Shoji. Daigo and Shoji, those they come up every now and then. They're a lot less important for sure. But the main ones, I think Ishiki is the most important of them. Ishiki is definitely he's an awesome character to start, and he gets way better as he goes along. Ishiki is definitely a mysterious guy. He's funny. He has the apron thing that he has going on. He's definitely eccentric, but he's very mysterious and frankly badass. And that small Shokugeki between him and Soma in this arc is a really good indication of his character and what is to come. Ibusaki, not as important, is he doesn't talk much, but the thing is, we understand that his specialization is smoking, smoke cooking, I should say. Marui, he's like a researcher, but he has like bad stamina, and his quirk is that he can't keep up, but he somehow always manages to stay with them. I just think it's funny. I mean, they're important, but they're not given enough screen time to really consider them like major characters. But they're supporting characters who have a thing or two that really makes them special. Yuki is another character, has a little bit more screen time than the other two. She's more of a bright, cheery girl who speaks up more, and she is like a wild animal collection, which is funny, of course, and it has its things. Ryoko is eye candy. Obviously, that's what she's there for, I guess. But she's good at fermentation, which is cool. So they set it up with Polar Star that everybody kind of has their own thing, aside from Ishiki, who does have a specialty, but it's not really stated in this arc at least, or really anywhere. But that being aside, the Polar Star Dorm, they have a really cool array of characters that really helps develop the story and the world, so to speak. Obviously, it's Earth, but it's the fantasy world, so to speak. So then we also have Mito Ikumi, who we're introduced to in this, and Ikumi or Nikumi is another character that is really she's known for her meets. A lot of innuendo with her, of course, and she's one of those sort of tsunderes with Soma. Of course, she's part of the harem at the end of that Shokugeki, but she's an interestingly developed character. We even see a little bit of a flashback at the end of her match, which is good. It develops her character a little bit. She's one of those tomboys that always kind of wanted to be girly, but was never allowed to. And I think that's a really important lesson to come across is a lot of, I think sometimes females are encouraged and sometimes forced into more male roles or male dominated roles just because there needs to be diversity. But sometimes, like, it's not in their interest or it's not what they want. And in this case, Nikumi wanted to be girly and was never allowed to. That kind of shines through with her character a little bit. But she's always kind of wearing very skimpy clothing, which is an interesting sort of counterculture to that. So she's an interesting character. That's kind of the main characters there. The story itself of Soma going through and declaring that he's going to take the top spot and make Erina say that his cooking is delicious. It's great. It's a simple story, but it doesn't have to be super complex. It's simple, but it works for what it is. So definitely nothing wrong here. This arc is really, really good at doing what it's supposed to do, and that is introduce the story, develop characters quickly, make us care. So now we have the training camp arc. This is where things really, really pick up. This is where we first really start to see Souma start to struggle a little bit, which is good, obviously, for character growth. He passes the first thing, fine. We're introduced to, of course, Takumi and Isami Aldini, and a few others like Alice, who doesn't really come into later, but Alice is introduced at least, and they go through the training camp. They, of course, manage to get by just fine. Along the way, Tadakuro being expelled for failing the test with Shinomiya, another character we're introduced to which Soma challenges him to a Shokugeki, loses, and ultimately, but is able to convince Shinomiya to, not expel Tadakuro and pass her. So they get that final thing done after a little bit of struggling with the 300, 200, 100 plates, something like that, and they go back. So, of course, character development. We have new characters. The Aldini brothers are really cool, especially Takumi is sort of introduced as a rival sort of character. He's another one who's come from not necessarily a commoner background, but definitely a restaurant background. And he comes from Italy, which is interesting. Of course, he's sent to Japan to increase his culinary skills. Isami, not as much. He's a little bit more of a background, but still cool. Still a good character for what he's worth. Introduces us to the Mezzaluna, of course, which is a cool real-life tool that is used, not often seen. And we're introduced to Nakiri Alice and Kurokiba, who hasn't, of course, Kurokiba hasn't gone crazy yet. We'll get there in the next one. Kurokiba and Alice, who's very funny, very, very anti-Erina in this case. Even though she's her cousin, she is very kind towards Soma. She's, very somewhat flirty, maybe, a little bit more cheerful and more talkative than Erina. She's a lot nicer for sure, and she's actually quite funny. And there's also her having the short hair, Erina having the long hair, which is another sort of juxtaposition, which I think is a really good tool for Yuto to have done and Shunseki to follow. There's a lot of juxtaposition between the cousins, and we see a little bit more of that story later on as to how they were treated. Then we have Shinomiya, who is a very deep character. He is a Totsuki alum who has, in a way, he's sort of plateaued after getting his Michelin-starred restaurants. He's trying to rekindle that, interestingly enough, through this earnest and honest chef known as Megumi Tadakuro. He's able to sort of reignite that through her hospitality cooking, which reminds him of his mother. It's a really, really interesting story because a lot of high schoolers, not just in Japan, not just in Soma, a lot of high schoolers have ambitions, and they're very passionate about what they want to do. They're passionate about something. I think a lot of adults, sometimes we tend to lose that. I know if I look at myself at 18 or 16, I'm a lot different and my passions are a little different. And I think if I went back and looked at myself, there would be a similar sort of passion reignition depending on what I was looking to do. I know every time I go back to my old high school for something, it's always a interesting feeling of nostalgia, and I think that's sort of what Shinomiya experiences here. It really, really comes through and makes him a very human and realistic character that we can somewhat relate to in a way. He was, I think, in rags before and went to riches. So he has somewhat of a rags to riches story. He just wanted to, make his mother happy by doing French cooking, which is incredible. Actually, a very, very pure motive. And somewhere along the way, he became a little bit more cold-hearted. So I really think the character of Shinomiya is really, really, really good. To the point where he gets his own spin-off, which is awesome. It's a really good spin-off. As far as character development goes, we see a little bit from the minor characters. They make it through the camp just fine. We see just a little bit here and there of what they're doing and how they pass. The bigger developments, of course, are with Soma and Megumi. Of course, Erina, not so much, although we finally get to see her cook for the first time, which is a thing to behold, of course. She is, of course, the queen. Still an unlikable queen, for sure, but a queen nonetheless. Soma and Tadakuro are the two characters that really get their development in the training camp arc. For one, Soma he struggles quite a bit, and he loses. He loses a Shokugeki. This is the first of quite a few to come, which is actually awesome. And there's this great character moment with Soma where after that match with Shinomiya, he asked to, he said, I'll catch up with you guys. And then when he thinks he's alone or knows he's alone, he smacks his fist against the wall in anger and frustration. And it's a really, really good character moment that shows, again, some people in anime and manga, again, just lose and, instantly they're just crying or whatever, or they'll be the opposite. They'll stonewall it and be like, it's okay, I learned so much from this defeat. But Soma has this very realistic moment that makes us again feel for him and really develops his character. And of course, Tadakuro grows relying on Soma and whatnot. She wants to do things. She wants to grow as a result of Soma. And there's a really amazing character moment between them. Actually, quite a few moments between them, especially when she's first told that she is expelled and failed the test. Soma goes crazy. He's about to attack him. He was about to attack Shinomiya, like physically, and Megumi holds him back. And that really shows how much he cares for her. Really set up a pairing between them, which was good development for sure. And then, of course, when they're alone and Soma smacks her hands, saying that calms people down, is a really good character moment between them. So, overall, I mean, the training camp arc was awesome, really, really well done, and really, I think, really developed the story in a way that we can all appreciate. Then, of course, we have the Mozuya arc, the mini arc. It was only a couple chapters. For those of you who may be wondering if you were an anime-only watcher to begin with, the Mozuya arc came before the Joichiro Shokugeki in the manga, and in the anime they flipped it, which is kind of strange. But we're covering the Kurage, which is very simple, not too much to it. Soma gets a little bit of development as he develops the recipe, and Nikumi develops a little bit. Even the childhood friend comes back a little bit and is developed. I think that's the last real time we get development from her. But of course, we're introduced to the Mozuya people and, of course, Azan, the Totsuki Elite 10 member. So he's introduced in this part, and of course he will become increasingly important later on in the story. So in terms of character development, as I said, Soma and Nikumi get the most. Of course, it does a good job of developing sort of the town around Yukihira, which is good to kind of, in turn, develop Soma's backstory a little bit, because we get to see what kind of town he really grew up in, whereas before we didn't see much before he went off. So this is a good way of really sort of grounding Soma even more. So that'll about do it for that. Overall, the arc was, again, very good. It did what it needed to do. It was a transitioning period between the training camp and the next arc, which we'll get to. It was just a little sort of winding down arc before things start to explode in energy, which we'll get to again. But yeah, overall, up until this point, we have a very, very good series going. A very good series. We have a very nicely developed main character that you root for and love, and we have a very interestingly simple but very effective story. It's unique, of course, that it's cooking and that it's, an academy of that's very prestigious, and it's very sort of Spartan in its ways, and it's unique and again effective. Of course, the art throughout all of this is incredible. Shunseki is an amazing artist, and his attention to detail is great. Morisaki Yuki, the chef who helps develop the recipes, made some really, really interesting recipes throughout this whole thing that really sort of solidified everything and made everything great. When it comes to the stripping thing, we'll talk about that at the end of everything, but I'll just say it's an interesting stylistic choice that I like, not just for the eye candy, but I think it's a good stylistic choice, and I'll explain why I think in the finale. But for now, that'll do it. Please stay tuned to the next thing, which is going to be the autumn election arc. So thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next time.